We are live on YouTube, so drop a greeting in the live chat. Let me know that you're here, that you can hear me okay, that you can see me okay. A new report claims that FBI Director Kash Patel is about to blow the gates wide open on the January 6th Fedsurrection. Yes, the Fedsurrection. Multiple news outlets are reporting that Patel has been dogged in getting information to Congress about the event, specifically about the pipe bomber, which, you know, is the key to unraveling the entire plot to entrap Trump supporters on January 6th. We are going to break that down today. I hope this is true, and I hope it comes soon. This is going to be one of the biggest exposures of the deep state weaponizing government against us that we have ever seen. In fact, I can't think off the top of my head of a single event of the deep state being exposed that we've ever experienced that would be bigger than this. Also, measles are in the news. We are told by public health officials, we are told by mainstream media, we are told by politicians that there's an outbreak of measles happening. Now, of course, mainstream outlets, never Trumpers, the public health officials would like to tie this supposed outbreak of measles to RFK because, he's an anti vaxxer, if you haven't already heard that. We're going to talk about the truth of what's happening here because there's a few pieces of information that the reports about these measles outbreaks are neglecting to tell you, and they're pretty critical pieces of information. We're going to talk about that. Also, protesters, pro Hamas, pro Mahmoud Khalil protesters have turned out in major cities across the United States to express their dissent to ICE arresting pro Hamas, Columbia University agitator and activist Mahmoud Khalil. He is going to be deported from the United States. And it's not a matter of free speech. Like we discussed yesterday, this is not a matter of chilling anyone's opinions. This is not un-American. This is not a US citizen that we're talking about. And there's an additional thought that I had about why it's so important that Mahmoud Khalil be deported. I had this additional thought after the show yesterday, so I want to share that with you today. Also, President Trump said that the attacks that Elon Musk is sustaining on his Tesla dealerships, a lot of leftists are mad at Elon Musk because he's doging the administrative state. And the result, of course, is what leftists always do. They are responding with violence. Well, Donald Trump said that violence against Tesla dealerships will be deemed domestic terrorism. All of this and more today on The Liz Wheeler Show. Okay, Kash Patel, according to a new report by Revolver News, is about to blow the lid off the January 6th pipe bomber conspiracy. We've been following this story pretty close, you and I, since the very beginning because you understand and I understand that the key to unlocking exactly what happened on January 6th lies in understanding why the FBI stopped their investigation into a man wearing a black hoodie who, in the evening of January 5th, allegedly placed an allegedly explosive device outside of two locations in Washington, D.C., outside of the Democrat National Committee, the DNC, and outside, well, it wasn't really the RNC, but outside of the Capitol Hill Club, where a lot of Republicans are known to congregate and network. And we've known for a long time that this shouldn't have been a case that caused the FBI that much consternation to solve. We have videotape of this man. We have tracking data from his phone, the geolocation data where every time you move, a GPS signal bounces between your phone and a satellite. And this data is publicly available. Advertisers, for example, can buy this information about your movement, about your location, and they can use it to create a profile of you so that they can target their ads to you better. Think about the ads that you get on your Instagram feed, for example. How do these advertisers know who you are and what you're interested in? Well, part of it's because they purchase this geo-tracking data and then they send that ad to your phone based on the data. The government also has access to this data, and the government, the FBI specifically, tracked the phones of anyone nearby the DNC and the RNC who possibly could have had the same footprint pattern based on this geo-tracking location from the phone as this person who allegedly planted an allegedly explosive device. And they narrowed down the suspects to 186 people. Well, 186 people, this should be a piece of cake for the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, these gumshoes. This should be an easy case to crack. Well, they did crack it. They narrowed down those 186 possible phone numbers to just one. One phone number. So we got him. We know who the January 6th pipe bomber is. But then suddenly, after they'd narrowed it down to just one person, the FBI stopped. The FBI ceased their investigation. The FBI closed the book on the January 6th pipe bomber investigation right before they got their guy. Why is that? Why did they do that? I think you know the answer to why they did that. I think I know the answer to why they did that. The FBI is at the very least covering up information that someone in the federal government doesn't want you to know. Now, whether it's the FBI that committed the wrongdoing, whether this was a completely staged event, whether the ATF was involved, whether Nancy Pelosi was in knowledge of this, we don't know those details yet, but Kash Patel does. The FBI director does. The new FBI director under President Trump has access to all the dirt on what happened on January 6th. And as soon as we know who exactly was involved in the staging of the pipe bomb, which, by the way, you'll remember we were told was the most dangerous potential act of domestic terror that was thwarted by law enforcement in DC that we have ever seen in our lifetime. Well, you'd think we'd be awfully interested in knowing exactly who committed that crime and not leaving it, what are we, four odd years later? We still don't know the name of this person? Well, who exactly was involved in this cover-up? Who was involved in this staging? You unlock that, and then you understand exactly who was involved in entrapping Trump supporters in and around the Capitol on January 6th, which led to the FBI raiding the homes of otherwise peaceful protesters who wandered into open doors and were guided around the Capitol by the Capitol police officers themselves, grandmas thrown in jail, people's lives ruined, misdemeanor charges being bulked up with terrorism enhancements to the point where at least one man, Matthew Perna, committed suicide because he could not face the penalty, the prison penalty he was going to face for something that he did not do. So if this new report is true, and I hope it is, and I think it is, because Kash Patel went into the FBI promising to root out the deep state, and this is it. This is the deep state. Stephen D'Antuono is the name of the FBI agent who was in charge of the DC field office. He was in charge of all the FBI operations in and around the Capitol in and around January 6th, and he was caught lying to the United States Congress when Congress investigated this. Stephen D'Antuono said, well, the reason that the FBI couldn't track who exactly or identify who exactly placed these allegedly explosive devices outside of the DNC and next door to the RNC is because when we, the FBI, Stephen D'Antuono claimed, requested the phone data to use the geo-tracking data to identify the person, when we contacted the telecom companies, meaning your cell phone carrier, and asked them for that information, the data was corrupted. We simply weren't able to bridge that gap. We needed that information to identify our man, and we didn't get it because the telecom company said the data was corrupted. This is what Stephen D'Antuono testified in front of Congress, and yet the major telecom company involved, the one who was facing this, what turned out to be false accusations, said, no, that's not true. We didn't have any data that was corrupted, and the FBI never requested that data from us and never told us that any data we did give them was corrupted. There's a massive cover-up that happened, my friends, a massive cover-up that would unlock the mystery of exactly who was behind staging the Fedsurrection, because we're long past the point where even those in the center and many on the left believe that what happened on January 6th was simply an organic grassroots protest that turned into some kind of violent protest. We are long past that point in public opinion. The majority of the American people understand that there were undercover feds that were fomenting violence on January 6th. The question is not whether that happened. The question is who was behind it. And then who helped cover the tracks. And Kash Patel is in a unique position to blow the lid off of this conspiracy. And according to reports, it's about to happen. And I pray that these reports are accurate. I pray that these reports are accurate. Julie Kelly, as you know, has been dogged in this fight. She was one of the first to report this, and she is incredibly credible. She claims that the deep state, those bureaucrats who hate Trump, are in a panic over Kash Patel. And my response to that would be, well, I would be too if I were them. That's exactly how they should be reacting, because they are caught. They are panicked in a corner with Kash Patel facing down on them. Julie Kelly says they're pretending that they're still looking for this individual. It's all part of the cover up. A head fake before January 6th. They're extremely nervous about FBI Director Kash Patel. Fox News also reported that FBI Director Kash Patel is working aggressively to comply ahead of schedule with congressional document requests in an effort to follow through on his commitment for the Bureau to provide transparency to the American people. A couple months ago, you'll remember we interviewed the founder of Revolver News, Darren Beatty, who is now at the State Department. We interviewed him about specifically not just January 6th, although he has been one of the best reporting from the very beginning on January 6th, but even more specifically, we asked him about the January 6th pipe bomber and what information the government has covered up and how they've staged that cover up. If you haven't watched that episode, highly recommend going back. You can search January 6th pipe bomber on any platform, YouTube or X or Apple or Spotify or Blaze TV, and you'll be able to find that. And as Revolver News puts it in their reporting, all points toward a government cover-up involving not just the FBI, but the ATF, the Secret Service, Capitol Police, and even Kamala Harris herself. The evidence is so damning that we have long referred to the January 6th pipe bombs as one of the two smoking guns of the Fedsurrection. The other smoking gun being Ray Epps. Revolver notes just recently, no less than Elon Musk, a confirmed reader of Revolver News, expressed his view that the pipe bomb story is a hoax and that the identity of the bomber could very well be a secret government employee. All right. And you guys, I can see you're blowing up the live chat. In the live chat, Ann Anonymous says, I don't care unless someone is actually held accountable. I'm sick of the investigations with no action. Amen to that, Ann. I am confident that Kash Patel will not simply stage what we have long criticized Republicans in the House of Representatives for doing, staging these kind of show trials where they want to get their sound bites so that they can go viral on social media, and then it leads to nothing. It leads to no charges, it leads to no accountability, it leads to no prison sentence, it leads to nothing except a fundraising campaign for congressional Republicans. Let me tell you, Kash Patel is different. Kash Patel will follow through on what he has promised to do. Kash Patel will blow the whistle, blow the roof off, not just the January 6th Fedsurrection, but the key to it all, which is, of course, the pipe bomber. I am confident in that. All right, before we talk about the measles, let's chat for a second about ivermectin. Now, you know the controversy here about ivermectin. You know what the playbook that the public health officials had written and applied to us about ivermectin. During COVID, they told us, don't take it. It's a cow drug. It's a horse drug. It's dangerous for you. And the reason that they told us not to take ivermectin for COVID-19 is because if they had allowed us to take it, then they would not have gotten their emergency use authorization for the COVID-19 mRNA jab. So they lied to us. They lied to us, and that lie was harmful to us and to our families. And to think about this, even 5 years later, so infuriating. It's so unbelievable that people would be so evil as to do this. I refuse, sitting before you today, to ever be in this position again, ever. I refuse not to have access to resources, medications that I need when I need them. It's why I am proud to partner with All Family Pharmacy. They offer over 200 different medications directly to you and bundled emergency packages to ensure that you are ready for anything before anything actually happens. You want to be ready beforehand. At the heart of this effort is the Make America Healthy Again movement. It's a call to take control of your health and prepare for the unexpected. And if you find yourself in a pinch, maybe like me, you're not always as prepared as you'd like to think that you are. It's okay. All Family Pharmacy's got you covered with overnight delivery. Go check them out. allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Because you are part of this movement, use code Liz10 at checkout for an exclusive discount. Again, that's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. Okay, we have been told by the mainstream media that there is an outbreak of measles cases, that this is a troubling report, we are told. These measles cases are in Texas and New Mexico, and according to almost any mainstream media outlet that you open today, this is clearly a coordinated narrative coming from them. The number of measles cases in Texas and New Mexico have risen by 28 cases in the past 5 days as this so-called outbreak spreads. Now, you can tell by the way that I'm phrasing this that I am skeptical of their phrasing, that they're they're attempting to make the perception of this as if that this is a highly contagious mass outbreak. They're in a sense trying to COVID-19 it. But I also understand that many people do not want measles. I don't want to get measles either. I don't want to get anything. But I don't like to be sick. I try to avoid it. But I do think it's important to understand a few facts about what is happening in Texas and New Mexico as related to these measles cases that the mainstream media is trying to obfuscate. I want to make sure that you have the full breadth of knowledge about what's happening here. So, in order to do that, I think it's important that we read this article. This is from Reuters. Reuters says Texas and New Mexico on Tuesday reported an increase of 28 cases of measles in the past 5 days, bringing the total known infections to 256 in the two states since the outbreak began in late January. The outbreak, which started in West Texas, caused the first U.S. measles death in a decade. It is also proved to be the first major challenge for U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a longtime vaccine skeptic. Now, let's pause there for just a second. This is, of course, why they are presenting this story. They're not presenting how many people have contracted influenza or how many people, even children, who have died from influenza. They are presenting this story about this small number of measles cases because they don't like RFK Jr. They've painted him as a dangerous anti-vaxxer, and they want you to associate a fear of measles or even one person dying of the measles, may God rest, give rest to that person's soul, with RFK Jr. So just a note on that. Reuters goes on to say, as of March 11th, cases reported in Texas rose to 223 from 198 on March 7th, and hospitalizations rose to 29 from 23. In Gaines County, which is the center of the outbreak, infections increased to 156. This is according to Texas Department of State Health Services. In New Mexico, cases rose from 30 to 33, including one case in a county that where none had been reported previously. Last week, the state reported that an unvaccinated adult who had died tested positive for measles. Medical examiners were still investigating the case, its first measles-related death. So let's pause there for 1 second. The way that this is phrased should raise our red flags. An unvaccinated adult. Now, an unvaccinated adult in southern Texas is another way of saying that this person is an illegal alien. That this person, and they don't report that, but I'm confident in my speculation because part of the role of the Border Patrol is to protect the American people from contagious disease. That's part of what securing our border means. It's not just protecting our border from individuals coming who would, change the culture of our country or overwhelm our welfare system or commit crimes or traffic drugs. It's also to protect our nation from diseases that are no longer prevalent in the United States. Reuters doesn't mention the immigration status of this individual, and I suspect that oversight is intentional. The other part of that sentence, last week, the state reported that an unvaccinated adult who had died tested positive for measles. Well, that's a strange way to construct a sentence. So did this person die from measles, or did this person die and then also had a positive measles test? Because I recall not too many years ago that we were told that a motorcyclist had died from COVID-19 when in fact that motorcyclist died as a result of a motorcycle crash and then in the autopsy also tested positive for COVID-19. So not exactly the same thing to die with a disease as it is to die from a disease. And yet Reuters does not make that distinction, which also raises red flags. The CDC told doctors last week, according to Reuters, the risk for widespread measles in the U.S. was low due to robust immunization surveillance programs and the country's capacity to respond. And then, of course, the most interesting part of all. Reuters says the measles, mumps, and rubella, MMR vaccine, is the most important tool for preventing measles, the CDC said. The health departments of both the affected states said 80 patients in Texas and 27 in New Mexico were unvaccinated. Okay, well, let's do the math here for just 1 second. If there are 223 total measles cases in Texas, according to Reuters, and 80 patients in Texas are unvaccinated, then the math is very simple here. 80 divided by 223 means that only 35% of those who contracted measles are unvaccinated, which means that 65% of those who contracted measles are vaccinated. Well, funny how Reuters, funny how the CDC, funny how nobody telling you how important the MMR vaccine is mentions that. mentions that 2/3 of the people who got measles in this so-called outbreaks in Texas were in fact vaccinated against it. And the same thing in New Mexico. 33 total people have contracted measles in New Mexico, and 27 of those 33 are unvaccinated. Now, that's a higher rate. It means that 81% who have contracted measles in New Mexico are unvaccinated, but it also means that 19%, 2 out of 10, were vaccinated against measles. That's a pretty significant percentage of those who contracted measles having taken the vaccine that we are told, perhaps, like COVID, is both safe and effective. This is why people don't trust the public health officials in our country. This is why people don't trust doctors. This is why people are skeptical. This is why people turn to individuals like RFK Jr., who analyzes the situation when it comes to the question of, is measles dangerous for your child? If you contract this disease, is your child likely to die? How fearful do you as a parent need to be about contracting measles? RFK Jr., the reason so many people trust him, the reason the MAHA movement is so strong and so powerful and growing by the day is because RFK Jr. doesn't try to obfuscate actual data in order to manipulate your perception of the situation. He simply knows the information about measles, about the vaccine, and about children who die from measles, and he tells you that in an upfront way so that you have the information you need to make an informed decision. For example, RFK Jr. was asked by John Stossel about children who die from measles, and this is what RFK said. Take a listen.
Used to die from those diseases.
Well, you know what? They died in the 1900s or early 1900s. There were about 10,000 Americans a year died. In 1964, there was about 300 or 400 who died, and they were almost all severely malnourished kids, mainly from the Mississippi Delta. This was before the poverty program, so there was a lot of starving children in our country. It's very, very hard to kill a healthy child with any infectious disease, but particularly with measles. And the World Health Organization now says vitamin A is an absolute cure for measles, which we didn't know about back then. Back then, we were treated with chicken soup, and it was, a week at home watching Leave It to Beaver, and every kid caught it. Every single kid got it. And I had 11 brothers and sisters, and we all got it, and we were all fine. And there are lots and lots of studies out there now that show that kids who get measles as a child are much healthier when they grow up, that they're much more resistant to cancers, to atopic diseases, to allergies, and to heart disease.
And that is why the vast majority of the American people no longer trust our public health officials, because our public health officials present, even Reuters, which is supposed to be one of the wire services, they're supposed to just report the facts, and they're not supposed to add any additional subjective commentary into their presentation. But what do? They fearmonger. And you contrast that with RFK. You listen to RFK and you're like, okay, now I have some information and I can build my own algorithm. I can understand whether it be measles or any other disease, whether this is a threat to me, whether it's something that I should be worried about, what I should do if it happens in order to reduce my likelihood of it being fatal for me or for my children. He respects you. That's the difference between RFK. He respects you enough to tell you the truth. But vitamin A seems to me to be very similar to what we have been talking about on the show about ivermectin, that vitamin A should be the first line of defense. This should be the first thing that public health officials recommend, whether it's the FDA or the CDC, whether it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, whether it's your own pediatrician, your family doctor. The first thing that should be recommended is if your child contracts measles, give them vitamin A according to XYZ protocol that prevents fatalities. This should be in the medicine cabinet of every mother across the country with every child. And because it's not, we should ask ourselves why. Why are we not told the truth? According to Dr. Alfred Sommer, he's at the MHS Bloomberg School of Public Health, he says, plain and simple, to improve clinical outcomes, children with measles need age-appropriate doses of vitamin A, period. period. He said vitamin A treatment of children with measles in resource-limited countries have been associated with decreased morbidity and mortality rates. Low serum concentrations of vitamin A also have been found in children in the US, and children with more severe measles illnesses have lower vitamin A. Now, that's not from Dr. Summer specifically. That's, I believe, from the National Foundation of Infectious Diseases. But why aren't we told this? Why is this hidden from us? Why are we treated as if we are stupid? Why are we treated as people, less than people? Why are we manipulated by our public health officials? And the answer to that, I think we all know the answer to that. But some critical facts that are important about this so-called measles outbreak before you freak out and before you believe the headlines from places like Reuters. All right, something that's happening in Maine is simply egregious. Simply egregious. Parents of a child who was given the mRNA COVID vaccine against their will, they did not consent to their child being vaccinated at school. A court has ruled against those parents. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But I want to talk to you about, if you love sleep as much as I love sleep, and I have young children, so believe me, I love sleep when I can get it. But if you have been dreaming of upgrading your bedding, now is the time to make it happen. Cozy Earth is celebrating World Sleep Week. Well, I got to tell my kids it's World Sleep Week. With an exclusive deal just for my listeners, a massive 45% off their award-winning sleep essentials from March 14th through the 16th only. You can save almost half off on the softest, most luxurious sheets. I have them on my bed right now. I can personally attest they are marvelous. Extra cozy blankets and their famous PJs crafted for next level comfort. Cozy Earth's premium fabrics are temperature regulating. They're moisture wicking. They keep you cool and dry and sleeping deeper all night long. I love Cozy Earth. Their sheets are just the softest I've ever felt, and I love how they keep me cool all night long. No more waking up overheated. Once you experience this kind of comfort, let me tell you, there is no going back. Trust me, it's a game changer for your sleep. But you do have to hurry. This huge 45% off deal is only valid March 14th through the 16th. Do not miss out. Go to CozyEarth.com. Use my code Liz at checkout. That's CozyEarth.com, code Liz. CozyEarth.com, code Liz. As a parent, can you imagine sending your child to school? You trust the school principal. You more or less trust the school administrator, trust the school nurses and teachers. And yet your child comes home from school one day and tells you, I've been given the COVID vaccine. And your reaction is, what? Did I sign a form that gave my consent that you as a minor, my child, would get this vaccine? No, I didn't sign any such thing. How did this happen? And the anger that I would feel as a parent, I feel indirect anger on behalf of these parents because of what we know about the COVID-19 vaccine, especially in adolescent men, in these young teenage men. And so what do you do as a parent if your child has been given a vaccine that you never consented to give? Well, that's happening in Maine, and the court's ruling, if your blood is not already boiling, it will be in a moment. This is why so many of us, again, do not trust public health officials. It's why so many of us have embraced MAHA. Let me tell you, one of my go-tos when I need relaxation, I'm kind of a health nut, but I love me some chips and salsa to the point that it's basically, I don't count chips and salsa when I'm calculating if I'm being healthy in my eating that day. Chips and salsa just have a permanent exemption, especially now that I have masa chips in my cabinet at home. Masa chips are free of seed oil, so guilt-free, right? Masa has only 3 ingredients: organic, nixtamalized corn, grass-fed and finished beef tallow, and Redmond sea salt. No seed oils, no pesticides, no fake ingredients, no toxins. How do you like that? All chips and fries, by the way, and most fried foods used to be cooked in tallow until the 80s and 90s, at which point corporations switched to seed oils in order to profit themselves. The corrupt part of that is that they lied to people, their consumers, and said seed oils are healthy for you. These are better than beef tallow, which of course was not true. Heart disease has skyrocketed since this switch, as have obesity and every inflammation-related condition. Seed oils are also disgusting, and beef tallow is not. I suppose that's an additional benefit. Let me just tell you, my husband loves masa chips. My sister also loves masa chips. They basically eat them out of my cabinet before before I can even restock them. I highly encourage you to check out Masa Chips, masachips.com. Use my promo code Liz Wheeler for a discount. That's masachips.com, promo code Liz Wheeler. Offer good on first-time orders only. And once you buy your first order, please let me know which flavor you like the best, because my husband, I think, likes the plain ones or the salt ones, and my sister likes the spicy ones the best. So a little war going on in our sphere about which is the best. All right. A court in Maine has ruled against these parents who sued after their child was vaccinated against their consent. This is from the Children's Health Defense. The Maine Supreme Judicial Court has upheld a lower court ruling that school medical staff who gave a COVID-19 vaccine to a minor without obtaining parental consent cannot be held liable. On March 4th, the school ruled that school medical staff were protected under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. It's called the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act provides a liability shield to covered persons, quote unquote, including those who administer COVID-19 or other countermeasures during a public health emergency. COVID-19 vaccines are covered under the PrEP Act because they were rolled out under emergency use authorization, which, by the way, brings us to a question we have long asked. Why are these vaccines still categorized as emergency use authorization, even though they're supposed to not be anymore? Well, the reason why is because the manufacturers are completely shielded from any liability for their product if it is being used under emergency use authorization. And clearly, rogue doctors and nurses and school administrators are also shielded from the responsibility, the accountability of vaccinating someone else's child without their parents' consent. According to Children's Health Defense, in November of 2021, JH, a minor, was given a dose of the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine at Miller's School in Waterboro, Maine. In May of 2023, JH's parents, Sierra Harrington and Jeremiah Hogan, who said they did not consent to the vaccination, sued Lincoln Medical Partners, Maine Health, and pediatrician Dr. Andrew Russ. The lawsuit, originally filed in Lincoln County Superior Court, challenged the PrEP Act's liability shield. The complaint alleged battery, negligence, false imprisonment, infliction of emotional distress, and torturous interference with parental rights. In April of 2024, the Maine Superior Court dismissed the lawsuit, finding that the PrEP Act granted immunity to the defendants. JH's parents appealed to the Maine Superior Judicial Court in August 2024, arguing that the PrEP Act does not protect practitioners from liability in cases involving non-consensual medical interventions. The appeal also referenced the Project BioShield Act of 2004, which states that people must have the option to accept or refuse administration of emergency use authorization products. In its ruling, the Maine Supreme Judicial Court found that the staff who administered the vaccine to JH were immune under the PrEP Act because they were so-called covered persons as defined by the Act, and because the vaccine was classified as a covered countermeasure and was administered during a public health emergency. Can you even fathom being these parents? That report was according to the Children's Health Defense. Can you even imagine what it feels like to have your teenager come home and tell you that he'd been forcibly given the COVID mRNA jab and that you had not given permission? You had not signed a document consenting to that medical procedure being done on your child. We've talked about activist judges on this show quite a bit recently because of all of the inferior court judges. And the definition of inferior court is simply a court that is lower than the U.S. Supreme Court. They are not mandated by our Constitution. They are simply, the establishment of inferior courts are simply allowed if by congressional act. That's why we have any kind of circuit court, court of appeals that's allowed to be established by Congress, but it's not required. Only the Supreme Court is required. And these inferior court judges were issuing nationwide injunctions against President Trump's executive orders, and yet they had no authority to do so. These inferior court judges are not allowed to issue nationwide injunctions. They're only allowed to rule in a very limited scope. They're allowed to rule only on the case before them. They are not allowed to issue precedent setting or rulings that have implications outside of the immediate people involved in that case in which they are ruling. And we've talked about these activist judges and what can be done. And do we have an obligation, the Trump administration, do they have an obligation to adhere to these nationwide injunctions when these judges simply have no authority to declare a nationwide injunction? It would be like me sitting here and saying, I declare a nationwide injunction. Not a single person should be given the mRNA vaccine. Well, that would be great if people wanted to comply with that, but I have no authority to do that, to declare that. And what do you do with these activist judges? How do we handle them? Do we impeach them? Do we expose their corruption? Do we simply disregard their rulings? Do we pressure our Congress members to, via the same legislative act that established these courts, abolish those lower courts because they are abusing their role on the bench? What do we do? And those are the very questions that we should apply to this case. The parents of JH should appeal this to the Supreme Court, not based solely on the arguments that they presented, although the arguments they presented are pretty airtight, in my opinion, that American citizens, and children are American citizens, of course, must have the option under our law to accept or refuse emergency use authorization products. You cannot force someone to take a product that has not been FDA approved. You must give someone the right to decline that. There's no exception in the Project BioShield Act of 2004 for a school administrator to simply decide that he or she, this doesn't apply to he or she, and he can give a vaccine that's emergency use authorization to a child whose parents didn't consent to it. That in and of itself should be an airtight defense. The defense of these parents also says that, well, listen, the liability shield does not apply to non-consensual medical interventions. You are simply shielded from liability if the patient says, yeah, go ahead and give me that vaccine, then they have a negative reaction. The provider individually can't necessarily be held liable for that, but not when it's non-consensual. But there's a third argument that these parents should bring to the U.S. Supreme Court when they appeal it. And this argument involves precedent, Supreme Court rulings in the past about whether a government official can actually forcibly vaccinate a child. And the answer to that is no, that there is precedent in United States Supreme Court rulings actually about Amish children, Amish 8th graders who were facing a vaccine mandate to continue to attend school. And their parents said, no, I don't want you to have to take these vaccines. And the Supreme Court ruled that no, actually parents can't be forced to vaccinate their children. They cannot be forced to vaccinate their children. There is airtight, let me repeat, airtight Supreme Court precedent that says that parents cannot be forced to vaccinate their children. And so what possible argument could there be that school officials and pediatricians can forcibly vaccinate children when their parents specifically did not give consent? Raise your voices, my friends. There are certain cases that require all of us as a community to let those who govern our country know that we will not tolerate, we will not accept this. We will not accept a reality where children are forcibly vaccinated against their parents' wishes, and that those who committed that crime against that child face zero accountability. We will not accept that. Let your voice be heard. Let your voice be heard. And by the way, speaking of health measures, the Boston Globe is now admitting, 4 years later, that actually the lockdowns during COVID-19 were not effective. Oh, thank you for telling us after all this time. We could have told you 5 minutes into it that it wasn't effective. We're going to read that in just a second. Remember Biden? Yeah, that guy. Where do you think he even is? What is he doing right now? He's just disappeared in a puff of smoke. Well, thanks to Biden, while he has disappeared, the ramifications of his policies have not disappeared. The US dollar is still facing unprecedented inflation that can't be changed overnight. It's impacting us, and it's scary to face the devaluation of our dollar because politicians in our country and globalists around the world are always trying to control us, and their favorite way of controlling us right now is using our money to control us. They're trying to control us with their new digital dollar. Don't let them do that. I'm not going to let them do that. It's never been more important to take control of your own wealth so that that is not a lever that globalists and politicians can use in order to manipulate you. Don't let your life savings become a casualty of failing banks or currency wars or these politicians. Now is the time. I highly, highly encourage you to call the only precious metal dealer I trust, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings, your retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. My husband and I did this. A portion of our wealth portfolio is now in physical precious metals. American Hartford Gold is the company to call, and what a fabulous company they are. They support content like this because we are committed to bringing you the truth. Tell them I sent you. They'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first order. Call them now. You can click the link in the description of this episode or call 866-996-5172. That's 866-996-5172, or text my name, Liz, to 998899. Again, that's 866-996-5172, or text Liz to 998899. All right. According to the Boston Globe, better late than never. I can't even say that with a straight face. Like, what idiots these people were to A, fall for lockdowns in the first place, and then to take 4.5 years before they can admit that lockdowns were not effective. This, according to the Boston Globe, a growing number of scientific studies have concluded the measures in the United States did little to slow the rampaging pathogen. Ooh, a new phrase, rampaging pathogen. What's more, the stifling of public debate about them eroded trust in public health policy and prevented more effective strategies, according to a number of prominent infectious disease experts. Ugh, the word expert just gives me the creeps at this point. The measures included poverty and wealth disparities, spurred a dramatic rise in adolescent anxiety and depression, contributed to a surge in fatal drug overdoses, and led to devastating learning losses in school children who have yet to recover, according to scientific studies. As of last spring, the average American student remained half a grade behind pre-pandemic levels in both math and reading, according to a recent report card on pandemic learning loss. What's more, this according to the Boston Globe, months of unrelenting seclusion caused many people to sever social connections with lasting consequences to mental and physical health. Both volunteering at nonprofits and church attendance, two measures of social engagement, declined and have not recovered to pre-pandemic levels. In 2023, the nation's Surgeon General warned of an epidemic of loneliness and isolation brought on in part by lockdown measures that isolated people. And that is not counting the other costs in lost livelihoods, shuttered businesses, and the anguish of seeing relatives die alone without being able to say goodbye. Here's the thing. I am in the business of persuading. It is my job and my calling to sit here with you on a daily basis, to talk about things that matter, to make a case for policies and philosophies and a moral code, and convince those who may not agree that actually they should agree. That's my calling. To identify the truth and to present the truth in a way where even people who might have an initial negative reaction about the truth say, wait a second, she's got a point there, huh? And so when someone changes their mind, when someone sees the light, when someone abandons a bad opinion that they used to hold, that makes me happy. I don't want to sit here and lord it over someone and be like, oh, you used to be stupid. I'm never going to let you hear the end of that. No. I want people with bad opinions to change their mind. That's what I'm here for. But at the same time, we shouldn't mistake extending people who were wrong grace. I certainly hope that in areas where I have been wrong, that grace will be extended to me. We shouldn't mistake extending grace and a warm welcome to those who want to join our side with giving those who were in a position of power and abused that power based either on profit motive on power trips, or an ideology, a position of power again to abuse us again. Those are two very different things. And so maybe some people thought that lockdowns would be helpful. I thought it was pretty obvious right from the get-go that they would not be effective, and I thought it was pretty obvious to see the negative repercussions, the significant, even severe negative implications of lockdowns, and that I was correct. But even if someone didn't, I'm glad you changed your mind. But if the person who forced the lockdowns on us, who defended the lockdowns, who stifled debates about the lockdowns, wants to be in a position of power again, that is where I draw the line. The answer to that is no. The answer to that is I don't believe in cancel culture. I'm not going to prevent such a person from working or participating in public society, but you have lost your opportunity, probably forever, to be in a position of power over us, because when you were in that position of power, you abused your privilege. Period. President Trump has cut funding to the state of Maine in the wake of the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, allowing boys to play in girls' sports. This is from the Post Millennial. On Tuesday, the U.S. Department of Agriculture paused funding to the University of Maine system, UMS, a network of 8 public colleges in the state. According to UMS officials, the pause is in response to Maine's refusal to comply with President Donald Trump's executive order that keeps biological men out of women's sports. Fox News reported that the USDA is reviewing potential Title IX and Title VI violations for the universities for failing to comply with the order. And I would just like to say this is the exact correct way, the proper way for Donald Trump to handle this, because of course the left is waiting. They are hoping that President Trump cuts funding from some program where they can hold up a recipient of that program as some kind of vulnerable individual, some kind of sympathetic figure, and say, look how you've hurt this little girl who's no longer going to have her lunch money. But President Trump is running his administration just a little bit differently this time. He's operating not just one step ahead of the press, not just 2 steps ahead of the left. He is light years ahead of the tactics, the propaganda tactics of the left. And he knows exactly how to put pressure on the state of Maine to make it hurt without hurting the people of Maine, because the people of Maine are not responsible for Janet Mills' radicalism, although some of them did vote for her, and they should remember exactly what she's doing to them. But to take money away from universities is exactly the correct tactic by Donald Trump, and it will be effective because universities rely on federal money. They cannot lose that federal money and stay operational. And it's a tactic that presidents of the United States long should have been using to root out radicalism in universities. They should have long been saying, we're going to take away your research grants. We're going to take away all the money that we give to your labs. We're going to take away every kind of loan that's backed by the federal government if you continue to teach our children to be hostile to the United States of America. If you continue to teach our children that men can be women. If you continue to teach our children that terrorism in the Middle East is a good thing and that America is oppressive, all that money should have been gone in an instant, and it would have stopped. It will still stop the indoctrination of our youth. President Trump, as usual, is completely correct about this. All right, as usual, we had more topics than we had time to cover. That's the fun thing about this show, is it not? We talk about the things that matter in a way that sometimes runs a little bit longer than we planned. All right. Make sure you follow me on X at Liz_Wheeler, because I wrote a piece last night that I think you'll be interested in about Mahmoud Khalil. It's the argument for why it is the good thing, the proper thing, the necessary thing, critically important to the America First agenda to deport him. I know some conservatives don't at face value agree, but as I said before, I am in the business of persuading. So please go read that piece that I wrote on my X account and tell me if you do not agree once you have completed your reading. And go ahead and tell me if you disagree too, but something tells me that you will actually agree, because I'd like to think it's a pretty airtight argument. All right. on x.com/Liz_Wheeler, youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, on Apple, on Spotify, search The Liz Wheeler Show and give us a subscribe over there. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.